Well, it's time for yet another face-off video. This time we're going to be taking a look at the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition Gallatin core with a whopping 2 megabytes of level 3 cache, which is unique for a Pentium 4 processor. And we're going to be pitting it up against an Athlon 64. We're going to be pitting it up against two Athlon 64s, a socket 754 and a 939, both of which are 3200 plus rated. So let's get started right now. So to start off with, let's talk about the motherboards being used in this face-off video. The Pentium 4 platform is the Asus P4C800E Deluxe motherboard, which has the 875p chipset with PAT enabled on it. And in this particular case, I did enable the Turbo Performance option in the BIOS. For the 939 platform, it's an 8-bit AV8 with the VIA KHT800 Pro chipset, AGP8X chipset, and does have USB 2.0 in case anyone's interested. And for the socket 754 platform, it's an MSI K8N Neo with the Enforce 3-250 chipset. All of these motherboards are running the latest BIOSes, and except for the Turbo Performance that I enabled on the Asus, they're all running the default settings in the BIOS. For the video card here, the 6800 GT AGP8X card, which is error correct for this platform. Other than the Ultra and some overclocked special versions of this card, it was pretty much the top of the line in 2004 and early 2005 until the 7000 series came out. Operating system is Windows XP. Memory, CAS latency 2, DDR 1 gigabytes worth. Both the Intel platform and the 939 are running dual channel memory, whereas the 754 is single channel only. So let's take a look at the specs of each three processors here. And so you can see that the Intel has that level 3 cache, 2 megabytes. It's an interesting level 1 cache arrangement. And the 939 and the 754 have the same L1 cache. The 754 is 256K of cache, 939 is 512K of level 2 cache. The benchmarks in this video were ran with default out-of-the-box settings. Resolution 1024 by 768, just to try to keep the video card from being a bottleneck in these benchmarks. Because remember, we're testing CPU performance more than we are the video card here. So the first round of benchmarks here will be done with Everest Unlimited. We'll do the CPU test here first, CPU Queen to be exact. Socket 939 is scoring 3500. Pentium 4 Extreme Edition is 3243, so it's a little bit lower. And surprisingly enough, the socket 754 chip is scoring 3858, and I really don't understand the reason for this, but it probably has something to do with the fact that this processor is running 200 megahertz faster than the socket 939. I honestly would have thought the 754 and the 939, the numbers should have been reversed there, but it's kind of interesting actually. So now let's take a look at the Fpu performance of these processors. Socket 939 is scoring 854, the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition is 1154, and the Athlon on the 754 socket is scoring 922, again probably because of the 200 extra megahertz that processor has to play with. Memory write speeds, you can see here that the Athlon on the 939 platform is blisteringly fast compared to everybody else here. 5769 versus 4258 versus 2481. The socket 754 is not looking good right here with its single channel RAM. That integrated memory controller really does like that dual channel configuration a lot. And as you would expect, it's pretty close to being double what the 754 is. So let's have a look at the write speed of the memory here. 6195 for the 939 platform versus 5577 for the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition. And we get down to the 754 socket and we're down to 3079 megabytes a second there. So the Athlon 64, you can see it definitely benefits from that dual channel. It's roughly doubling the memory speed here on the read, which you would expect for dual channel memory. But how does that impact gaming performance? Well, let's take a look at that here with 3D Mark. We're going to start off with 3D Mark 2001. 21,730 3D marks for the 939, 21,776 3D marks for the Pentium 4 EE, so we've got a little bit of a boost there. 19,497 3D marks for the Socket 754. That's not too terribly bad for the Socket 754. But you can see that I would say that the performance between the Pentium 4 EE and the Socket 939 Athlon are basically the same here. We've got, what, a 46-point difference here between the two. You know, you could probably get that by running this benchmark a few times. So I'm going to say statistically those are identical. Similarly, again here you can see it in 3D Mark 2003, the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition is edging out the 939 by a little tiny bit more. Here, 11,420 versus 11,849. The Socket 754 is bringing up the rear at 11,019 3D marks, which is really not too far behind everybody else. At least it's still within the 11,000 mark there, so it's not looking too bad right there. So in 3D Mark 2005, you can see here that the processors are much more evenly matched here. 4978 versus 5033 versus 4946. I tell you right now, I do believe that the video card is the bottleneck on these benchmarks here. Even though the 6800 GT and the Ultra cards were the hot shit back then, they're still clearly a bottleneck for the system. So a much better HEP card might result in a different number on all three of these tests. But as you can see, for an error-correct video card, top to line, pretty much top to line error-correct video card, you can see that both of these processors, the 939 and the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition, are pretty much evenly matched here. Socket 754 is really not doing too bad here. So we'll take a look at two real-world examples of gaming here. First, we'll take a look at Doom 3. 939 is scoring nearly 100 frames per second here. Pentium 4 EE is scoring 90 frames a second. And the 754 is scoring 75 frames per second here. So, interestingly enough, even though the 3D Mark scores show the Pentium 4 EE and the 939 Athlon 64 to be virtually identical, when we get to Doom here, you can see that there actually is a pretty significant difference there. I would call 10 frames a second a pretty big difference there. Of course, the Socket 754 again is having to cope with the lack of dual channel memory, so I think that's why we're seeing 75 frames per second on that processor there. But things get interesting when we get to Quake 4. Quake 4 is where the tables get reversed on the Athlon 939 and the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition here. As you can see, the 939 is scoring 83 frames per second versus 91 frames per second for the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition. 73 frames per second for the Socket 754 Athlon. I have no idea why these results are reversed. They are accurate. I did make sure that this was correct, or what the results were. So take it for what it is, and I find it interesting that both of these games, Doom 3 and Quake 4, are ran on the same engine. So they should perform the same, basically. 939 should be ahead on both games, but it's not. So I don't know what to make of this. Well, the results are in. Pentium 4 Extreme Edition is a pretty damn nice chip. However, the Socket 939 Athlon 64 held its ground pretty well. Considering that this processor runs at 200 MHz less than the 754 counterpart, it seems to really be rated right at the correct rating. And this is obviously not a Prescott chip. I think the scores would be worse for the Pentium 4 if it was, since the Gallatin core was based on the Northwood. And we all know that the Pentium 4 Northwood was the better of the two processor designs. So we gave the Pentium 4 its best chance to shine here, and I think it did that. So do I think the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition won this test? I don't really think so, and I'll tell you why. It's running 1200 MHz faster than the 939 processor, and its score is identical. I mean, there's no denying it. In some cases, it outperforms the Athlon 64. In other cases, the Athlon 64 outperforms it. It's just the way of the nature of the beast. The Pentium 4 Extreme Edition also cost a hell of a lot of money back then. And they still are not terribly cheap compared to the Athlon counterpart, although they're obviously way more affordable now in the neighborhood of 20-30 bucks, maybe 40 here and there, but for the 3.2 gigahertz model. The 3.4 gigahertz models are not that cheap, and people want way too much for them, so I would not recommend those. Given the fact that the Pentium 4 has level 3 cache, 2 megabytes worth, and it still could just keep up with the Athlon 64, which has 512K of level 2 cache, I don't really think it was worth it. Unless you really just wanted to stick with Intel and you really just had a lot of money that you wanted to waste, I don't think at the time it was worth it. 939 platform was a very good platform, and so is Socket 754. Now the 754 chip was not that far behind. It was also the cheaper of the three by a healthy amount. So you could see for the budget gamer, the Athlon 64 on the 754 platform made a lot of sense, and so did the Semperons too, which by the way is something that I might review a little bit later on, or do a face-off about the Athlon 64 754 versus the Semperon 754. That might be kind of interesting. The results here are inconclusive, however, as to which one might actually pull ahead, and I will only say this. That video card, the 6800 GT, was the top-of-the-line video card back then, and next to the Ultra version, or, you know, overclocked special versions of it. So this is a valid test for the time period. Now, if we were to take and put, say, a 3850 AGP card, or 4870, 4850, whatever the last AGP card was ATI AMD put out, on this, the results might change a little bit. I thought about using my 7600 GS, and I decided I just didn't really feel like pulling it out of the case, honestly. So that's the only reason. We may have to re-examine these benchmarks again in the future. I do have another Pentium 4 and AMD face-off, however, so I may use a different video card for that. I don't know. I've got an ATI X800 video card, which is the same era of card, which people said was not as fast as the 6800 GT, but we shall find out at some point, because I'd be curious to know myself. So we've also got other options as well. I've got a 1650X. I might think about getting a 2600 maybe, just for shits and giggles, if I could find one for really cheap. So there might be future revisions to this particular video, but for right now, I'm going to say that we're kind of at a stalemate, and a price-performance ratio, the Athlon 64 blew all of them out of the water in this test. No matter whether you went with the 939 or the 754, they both won the test hands down. So I'm sorry, guys. I like the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition. I think it's a unique chip, and now at this point in time, I think it's a great option to go with. But you know, we're looking at era 2004. The prices back then, it wasn't worth it. So anyway, take care, everyone. Peace out. And let me tell you what, Quake 4 can suck my left nut. Every time I swapped motherboards, this damn thing wanted me to put the product key back in. Really pissed me off. Crappy software, I tell you what. And as a last note to this video, check out the intro music to Doom 3 here. Now that, my friends, is Tool. I know my Tool. I don't have to look it up to be 100% positive. Tool did that. And I'm very impressed that ID Software landed Tool to do music for Doom 3. I never noticed that until I did these benchmarks with Doom 3. Because every time I've ever played Doom 3, I just go past this intro window as fast as I can so I can start playing the game. I never sat here and actually listened to it. But that is unmistakably Tool. And I gotta give ID a lot of credit for landing Tool, because Tool isn't a band, even back then, that was a no-name, nobody heard of band. Tool was pretty big back then, so fact that ID Software landed them to do music for the game, that is impressive.